We are called to help people lift their burdens. That is one of the purposes of the church. That includes helping people lift the burden of sin off of themselves. But what if they don't want to lift? What are we supposed to do then? I'm Pastor Jason Barnett, and this is the Dirt Path Sermon Podcast.
Based on, or read it with knowing that all the events that have happened in the world is found in Genesis 1 through 3. That is the history of the world at this point. Nothing else has happened. Why is that important? Because when you read it, you cannot apply the rest of the laws of God to this chapter of the Bible. Why? Because they have not happened yet. God is just. God is not going to hold Cain and Abel to a standard that he has yet to reveal to anyone. So it's important when we read through this text that we read through it with that understanding, because if you try and read the Mosaic law into this, you are going to end up in a weird place, and it's going to confuse you later on as you read through the Scripture and your understanding of God. Second disclaimer is this. When you read through this, you will notice that Abel is a keeper of sheep and Cain a tiller of the ground. These are two very different jobs. Now, I don't know a whole lot about farming, okay? I grew up in a southern Indiana town with cornfields all around me, but I'll be honest, I've worked in offices and outside around offices my entire life, okay? But I do know that tilling the ground is different than taking care of livestock. I know that there's two very different processes. But I do know this, that both of those jobs are important. Right? You need both of those jobs to be successful. I really don't know why Cain was the tiller and Abel was the keeper of the sheep. It could have been that was just their gifting or the callings that they felt in their lives. But understand, when we read through this chapter, their jobs are not the issue. They both work hard at their jobs, and the rewards of their labors are two different things. There's two different outcomes based on their hard work. The third disclaimer. It is absolutely about the sacrifices. Let's look at the sacrifices here in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3 and 4. It says, next, Eve bore his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of the sheep, Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel for his part brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portion. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain he didn't. There's something about the offering that God rejects. The sacrifice is the issue. But when I say sacrifice is the issue, you have to pay attention to what the writer is saying in verses 3 and 4. Notice the offering that they give. It is not the content of the offering that is the issue. It is the intent behind the offering. You see, I opened up by telling you, remember that we cannot put the law of Moses upon Cain and Abel here. It has not been established. Later on in Scripture, yes, for the forgiveness of sins, there has to be a blood sacrifice. An animal has to be killed and blood spilled. That is the entire book of Leviticus. That's the entire book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. And that's how God's people functioned for centuries. But that has not been established here yet. but it is about the sacrifice. And this is what it says here. It says, but at Abel's offering, he brought the firstlings of the flock, their fat portions. He brought to God the very best that he had to offer. That means when Abel went before God to take his offering to God, to show God his love and obedience to him, he actually stopped and thought about, what should I take to this God who is ruler over everything? I'm going to take the very best that I have and give it to him. And this is why the writer of the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, chapter 11, verse 5, he writes, this is the famous faith chapter. We're talking all about faith. And when he's talking about Abel, he says, by faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. It wasn't the offering itself that mattered to God. It was the intent behind it. Abel brought his offering to God out of faith in God. Verse 3 shows us, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of fruit. Notice there's no real other adjective than that, is there? The writer, he stops, he takes time to describe in detail the offering that Abel brings before God. But when it comes to Cain, all it says is Cain brought an offering of fruit. He brought God a fruit basket. See, Cain, he knew he had to give an offering to God, but he didn't put any thought into it. He didn't stop and think about it. He knew he had to give God something, so he just grabbed a basket full of fruit and says, hey, God, here you go. The issue is the sacrifices. But it's not the content of the sacrifices, but the intent of the heart who offers the sacrifice. Jason, how can you say that? Because later on, even in the midst of the Old Testament, when God's people are sinning, God tells them, he says, I desire obedience, not sacrifice. And God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So that means the same God that's here in Genesis is the same God that is dealing with the Israelites in Samuel. The same God that the writer of Hebrews is talking about later. And this should point, this is a sidetrack, but this should point something else to you about God. Our understanding of God has changed from the very beginning of time to now. God hasn't changed, but how we understand God, how we see God, how we respond and worship God is not the same as it was years ago. As we've grown to know God, as we've grown closer to God, and He's revealed more of Himself to us, that has changed as the years have gone by. And guess what? If you don't like how we worship today, it's going to change again 20 years from now. And I don't know if I shared this before, one of my favorite jokes in the class in the bar I'm taking right now that I share is the most constant thing about, the one constant tradition of the church that never changes is we fight about the traditions of the church. That is our probably oldest, oldest running tradition, is fighting about the traditions of the church. And that's demonstrated just right here in the book of Genesis. Anyway, back to the task at hand. So God accepts Abel's offering because Abel gives it out of his heart and out of faith in God, and out of respect and love and obedience to God. Cain just shows up with a fruit basket and says, here you go, God, I found this for you. And God rejects Cain's offering. And this makes Cain upset. He is angry. He is livid with God. He sees all the blessings that God is pouring out upon Abel. And Cain, he wants the blessings that Abel gets. He wants what Abel has. But he wants to be able to do it and live the life the way he wants to. He wants what Abel has, but he doesn't want to have Abel's faith. He wants to have the blessings that Abel has in his life, but he doesn't want to stop and think about God the same way that Abel did. Cain is not interested in thinking about God. It's all about him and what he gets out in exchange. And God, knowing Abel's heart, or Cain's heart, he sees him angry. He says, "Hey, why are you upset?" This isn't God being confused. This isn't God not knowing something. This is God knowing exactly who Cain is, exactly what Cain's dealing with in the moment. God is asking this question to try and get Cain to slow down a minute and think about why he is where he's at. He wants Cain to take a step back and think to himself, why are you angry and upset? That's why God goes on to say, why are you angry? If you do well, will you not be accepted? He's trying to get Cain to admit it was you and your decision to offer this sacrifice that was wrong. It was your attitude that was wrong. You were the problem. And all you have to do is to make it better, Cain. All you have to do to make it right is to offer me a sacrifice from a heart full of faith and obedience. That's it. That's all you have to do to make it right. And you're being angry about this, but all you have to do is admit and change the way that you're doing things. This whole exchange right here reveals Cain's heart. It shows that he has no interest in God or the things of God. And at the same time, it reveals to us God's heart. Cain has no interest in God or having faith in him or anything that he might have to do to change about himself to make him acceptable in God's eyes. But God is showing Cain that, you know what? You may not want me, but I love you. And you need me. And I'm not going anywhere. You may not want me or need me, but I'm going to try and help you anyway. I'm going to warn you that about what's going to happen if you don't stop and think about why you're angry right now. Because once you walk through that door, you're entering a scenario where there's no turning back. Verse 8 says, Cain said to his brother Abel. We don't know how much time has passed here. But Cain says to his brother Abel, let us go out to the field. That tells us this whole incident, this whole act was premeditated. Cain sat down and he thought this through. He had a plan. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Now we don't know what weapon Cain actually uses to kill Abel here. The Bible doesn't tell us, does it? We know whatever it is that it spills Abel's blood upon the ground. But other than that, we don't know what instrument Cain chooses to use to take his brother's life. Then again, does it really matter what the instrument is? You see, we can't blame a weapon for killing somebody. It's never the weapon's fault. There's always somebody that picks it up and makes the decision to use it with the intention of evil behind it. Weapons do not make decisions for themselves, people do. That's valid enough, I'll say about that. It was Cain's decision. It was Cain's intent. It was Cain's wicked heart that made this decision in the moment. God had warned him, hey, if you don't deal with this anger, you're gonna walk out the door and you're gonna walk into something worse. Cain disregards it. And he's so bent on not admitting that he's wrong. He's so self-assured that he is right in this moment that his sin convinces him. Your brother is the reason why God's not blessing him. God's not blessing you because your brother is hogging all of God's attention, all of God's affection. So your brother has to be eliminated. So he takes his brother out into the field and he kills him. Notice the righteous brother is the one that dies for the sin of the sinful brother. God comes to Cain and he says, "Where is your brother Abel?" Where is he at? Again, God, it's not that God doesn't know. God is all-knowing. God asked Cain this question because he wants Cain to confess. Even in this moment, the heart of God is revealed. Cain has just murdered his brother in cold blood, and what is God doing? What is God trying to do? He's trying to get Cain to confess it so he can find mercy and forgiveness. Cain responds, "I don't know where he's at. Am I my brother's keeper?" You see, Cain knows he's guilty. You can't be confronted with your sin and be in the presence of God and not be convicted about your own righteousness. The light of God is so bright it reveals everything. He's just saying it in the song. There's no shadow he won't light up. There's no shadow that can't be lit up by the presence of God. It's all going to be out there in the open, and you have to acknowledge what it is. And that's what was happening to Cain. But rather than confess his sin, what does he say to God? He says, "I don't know where he's at. Am I in charge of my brother? Am I supposed to know where he's at?" He's kind of actually even accusing God of not knowing where Abel's at. Cain knows he's guilty. He just doesn't want to get caught. He doesn't want to have to confess his guilt. He doesn't want to have to give up the way he's living his life. Therefore, his brother must die on the altar of his sin. And then God tries to get him to confess to find mercy. Cain still shows no interest. He doesn't want it. Of course, God is he's unfazed by Cain's question. And he's unfazed by Cain's lie to try and deflect and defend himself. And how does God respond to Cain? He says, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. I know exactly what you did. I know exactly where your brother's at. He's in the field where you killed him, and he's lying there dead. Therefore, you're going to suffer punishment for what you've done. You are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." This is the punishment for Cain's sin. And notice God doesn't kill him, does he? God doesn't say, "Well, you killed your brother. That's it. Since the lightning bolt strikes him dead." That doesn't happen. What does God do? He says, "The ground is cursed because of you. This ground that you worked, that used to produce all this fruit for you to live, it's not going to do it for you anymore. As a matter of fact, you're going to be forced to leave and wander this earth as a fugitive because of the act that you have done." We see, when we read that, we miss that. Even in God's punishment, once again, God is demonstrating his mercy. He's yet again giving Cain time to stop and confess what he's done. He's giving him space to let him walk and wander and think about it. How did my life end up here? And how does Cain respond? Cain is overwhelmed by his punishment. He just killed his brother. punishment wasn't as good as Abel's. And what does he say after the punishment? He says, my punishment is too great for me. His brother's dead, he's still alive. And his response is, this punishment is too harsh. He's overwhelmed by the punishment. He's thinking about it. He's trying to figure out, how am I going to survive on my own, away from the presence of God? How am I going to survive if the ground isn't going to produce anything? How am I going to survive when I'm wandering by myself and a group comes up and tries to attack me? I'm a sitting duck. What about my mom and my dad and my siblings? When they hear what I have done, they're going to search out for me and they're going to kill me. This is just too harsh. I can't read this. And so God comes to Cain again. He says, not so, Cain. You may think you're all alone. You may think that you're going to be killed off out of vengeance for what's happened to you. But make no mistake, I am putting my mark of divine protection upon you. Even in this moment, God is still extending mercy to Cain. So Cain can see that there is a path to restoration. There's a path to life. All he has to do is be willing to confess it. But see, Cain is, while he's overwhelmed by the punishment, he is underwhelmed about God. He doesn't see all the times that God has offered him mercy and starting with offering him a way out of committing this act. God tries to stop him. Even after he commits it, God says, gives him an opportunity to confess and find mercy there, but Cain doesn't want it. And even as God's given his punishment, God allows him to wander. So he can stop and have time to think about it. And maybe the weight of sin that he's carrying, maybe the burden of this punishment will open his eyes and he'll see the mercy that is open and available to him. But he's not interested. And then even when he cries about the punishment, God gives him protection. He says that no one is going to be allowed to kill you. No one's going to be allowed to take vengeance upon your life because you are marked by my protection. Yes, this is a mark telling everyone what you have done, but it's also a mark saying that God has protection over you. He's overwhelmed by the punishment. He doesn't even stop to even consider all the mercy that God's shown him. Cain's got a burden he has no interest in lifting it off. How does this answer our question of what do we do when they don't want to lift the burden? When someone we know, and we've been praying for, and telling them about their sin and how they need to let this go, how we're not there to judge them, how we're not there to look down upon them, but we're there to help them lift this burden so they can find freedom in Jesus. But what happens if they just don't want to let that burden go? What are we supposed to do then? The answer? The good thing. The good thing. God's love, at no point in this story does God ever give up on Cain and say, I am done with you. At no point does God say, I'm washing my hands of you, Cain. No, he comes to Cain time and again in his relentless, reckless love, saying, Cain, there is a way of hope for you. There is mercy available to you, but you have to be willing to humble yourself and confess your sin. And I am not going to give up on you. I am going to keep pursuing you. As long as there is my air in your lungs, as long as you're blinking and walking and talking around and thinking through, I am going to keep chasing you. Because my love is relentless. And it does not want to let you go. If you look at verse 7. When God is talking to Cain, he says, sin is lurking at the door. God is telling Cain, sin is a ravenous beast. It is a ravenous monster. But when God is saying that to Cain, he's not talking like there's some demon hiding outside the doorway of the house he's in. It's not like there's some creature that's going to take control of Cain and use him as a robot. No, this ravenous monster is at the door of Cain's heart. It is inside Cain. God is telling Cain in this moment, you have a choice still. You can choose to not be here. You can choose to remain and process why you're upset and come to the truth about why you're upset. Because that ravenous monster said it wants to devour you. But as he said again, you must learn to master it. It's the same for us. Same for those that we're praying for that seem like they don't want to get rid of their burdens. They're standing there with a steamroller coming towards them. It's 25 feet away. They have all the time in the world to move, but they're just standing there saying, "Ah!" It's going to flatten them, but they don't want to move. They didn't get there by accident. They're not facing the punishment, the consequences of their sins by haphazard. It's not some type of concept of evolution that's led them to that moment. They are there because they have made sinful choice after sinful choice. They have refused to admit the truth about who they are and why they're there. But the beast that led them down that path, it wasn't the devil. It wasn't society. No, they are in that spot because they, from within themselves, thought for themselves and in their own wickedness of heart, made that choice to be there for themselves. The devil does not make you do it. Ever. You sin, and I sin. And the people we love sin. Why? Because they want to. That's what they want. And that's what the beast inside of them, that is him, is saying, I want to do this for me. I want to be popular. I want to have the power. I want to have all the money. And for me to get it, you're going to have to die on the altar of my sin as my sacrifice. That's what sin does. It doesn't just devour you, it devours the people in your life. That's what happened with Abel. He loved his brother. He showed up. I'm sure he probably knows, hey, there's something happening between me and Cain. Cain's upset with me for some reason I don't know. And maybe perhaps Abel thought he was going in that field for Cain to explain to him why was there this rift and what does Cain do? He kills him. Rather than be confronted in his own sin, rather than try and deal with the ravenous beast of himself, Cain says, no, my brother has to die so I can keep living the way I want to and keep being the person that I want to be. And that's what happened in our lives. And those that are being crushed by this burden of sin that they're trying to carry, that ravenous beast is inside and it's inside of us. And the longer we allow it to live, the longer we allow it to consume us, the greater the devastation it's going to cause. But when we are at our worst, God did the good thing. God did the good thing. What did he do? He sent his son Jesus Christ to die on the cross for us. It wasn't sin that held him there. Wasn't something wrong he had done. Jesus went hung on that cross because sin demands justice. Someone has to die as a penalty for sin. And God took that on for us. That burden of sin that we couldn't lift for ourselves, what did God do? He came and He lifted it up for us when we were helpless and couldn't do it. One day something beautiful happened. We saw the mercy that God made available to us. We saw that it was there, it was real, it was available. And out of faith, we reached out, we said, God, we believe. We believe that you died on the cross. We believe that you rose again. Not because you have done something wrong, but because I am a sinner, consumed by the ravenous beast of myself. I confess that that beast is there, so that way it can be put to death. Not on the sacrifice from the altar to myself, but on your altar. So I can be made into the person you created me to be. So I can be a person that lives according to your will. A person that desires to please you. A person that desires to see you glorified. But make no mistake, we did not get to that moment by ourselves. What did God do? God used other people that had kept coming into our lives, and without us realizing, without us truly recognizing, they helped us lift that burden. I was saved when I was 9 years old at kids camp. To this day, I have no idea what the guy talked about. I just knew when he gave that altar call, God was saying to me, it's time, you need to come confess, you need to come talk to me. So I did. But you know how I got to camp that year? My family wasn't wealthy. It was $100 to go to camp back then. You know how I got there? The people in the church had donated money. So that none of the kids in the church had to pay to go. They knew if they could just somehow get these kids that God had blessed them with to this camp, just maybe, even if it cost them $100, if we could just get in that camp and they heard the truth about Jesus, maybe it could change their life forever. I was at that camp because the church paid my way to go. It was the people of God that God used to help me lift the burden. If I were to sit down and tell you my entire life story from that point to here, I can tell you person after person who stepped in at my worst moments, at my most broken moments, and said, Jason, here, I'm going to help you lift this burden so you are not crushed by your own failure. You're not crushed by the sins of others. I am going to keep helping you lift it. Even when you don't want to lift yourself, I am going to lift for you. Hoping that you will see how much God loves you through me. That you will see how relentless God's love and pursuit of you is. Church, that's how we have to respond. That is the good thing. Yes, the way of sin is awful, and it will absolutely crush somebody. And yes, God's love is relentless, and it will chase you. And it won't let you go. It won't let you forget who you are. It won't let you forget what you're trying to run away from. But I can promise you this, as relentless as God's love is in pursuit of you, greater yet still is when you find rest in that love. When you find peace in that love of God. When you find life in that love of God. The freeing of the burden is greater than the weight ever will be. There's no weight that God can't help us remove. There's no point that you and I can run away from God to where God looks at us and says, no, I'm done with you. As long as you have breath, as long as you have life, God is going to pursue you. He is not going to give up on you. Even if you're here this morning and you don't want to lift that burden for yourself, God's saying, guess what? I'm still here. You may feel the weight of the consequences of your sin upon you in your life, but understand this. I am holding some of that weight back. Why? Hoping that your eyes will open and you will see how much I love you. That person you're praying for this morning. You're trying to figure out, God, why won't they get rid of this burden? God's not giving up on them. God's still pursuing them too. See, Cain had that opportunity time and again, but what did Cain decide to do? He chose a life of being a wanderer. He chose a life apart from the presence of God. What will we choose? Will we choose confession and freedom? Or will we choose to be crushed by the weight? Let's pray together. Dear God, I thank you for the truth of your word. I thank you for your help this morning in trying to piece this together. And to try and share this word, Lord. I know it was you, and I know it was your spirit guiding me and giving me the things to think about and say today. And I thank you for all the times you helped me lift the burden. And you sent others that helped lift the burden from me in my life when I wasn't willing to do so myself. I pray for those in this room this morning that maybe they're being crushed by the weight of the burden of their sin. Lord, I pray that you would help them to be able to be confronted by that today. But Lord, have a spirit where they are ready to confess, ready to find freedom and to rid themselves of that monster. I pray, Lord, for those that we're praying for, the names in this coffee can, and the people we grab at Ellsworth each and every day. Help us not to grow weary in doing good in their lives. Lord, we know they're not lifting. Many of them aren't interested in lifting. But God, would you help us to do good still? Give us your spirit that never gives up, a spirit that keeps pursuing. In your name I pray. Amen.
This message was recorded live at the Greensburg Church of the Nazarene, located at 31 Bluebird Lane in Greensburg, Kentucky. To learn more about us or to let us know that you were listening, visit www.gburgnaz.com. Special thanks to Buzzsprout for hosting this week's episode. If you want more from the Dirt Path, please like our Facebook page.